10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Good luck, studio.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Paul Chandler, the Shy Yeti. He's not that shy.
Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
All I wanted was a pie, and then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
It's the quiet ones you've got to watch, you know.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep? Is it deep?
Boy, he said all that shy is right. Jeez.
Blimey, Governor, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
524.
Hello, campers. How are you?
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Shy Life Podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm all right. I've got a special guest. He's been on the show before, but only on Chatterbox episodes, and well, you'll recognise him. It's Warren.
Hi.
How you doing?
Hi, everyone. Hello.
How you doing? Well, Warren from the Sausage Podcast. No, it's not called the Sausage. What is your podcast called?
It's a raspberry mivvy and a foot-long dog. It's about film. Because that's what you do when you go to the auditorium, isn't it? And not the foyer. You buy a raspberry mivvy and a foot-long dog. I used to as a child. Yes. It's nothing like a satisfying foot-long dog.
Yes, I don't think anyone ever took me to the cinema, so I never got anything. Maybe sometimes, but anyway, we're going to be talking about films today. But first, we need to run the theme music. So let's run that theme.
Darling, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Yes, but it's a positive thing, sir. A highlight, the Shy Life.
You won't find a cast of characters like this everywhere.
Hello, Paul.
You don't want four nuts.
I'll go anywhere for a potato.
Delicious. This particular episode of the Shy Life is a little more abstract than usual.
Go Shy Yeti.
Oh, I hope he hasn't found out my secret. I think he has.
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Oh, I can't wait for it to begin.
It's the Shy Life Podcast.
So we did be safe. I'm strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
But has the Shy Life Podcast slowed down? I don't think so.
It's all gooey and greasy and yum, 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 yum.
And we're back. So, yes, it's good to have you here, Warren.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be here. I'm rather nervous because I've got a lot to live up to.
Well, you've coped with the Chatterbox episodes, and they're some of the most sort of wild, everyone talking at the same time type episodes. So you get to be centre stage for this one. And,
I don't know. I'm a bit worried about that. The Chatterbox ones, I could hide behind Andrew and Lisa when we were doing those. That was good. But yeah, I quite enjoyed the Chatterbox, and it's great. It's great to speak to people all over the world when you're doing Chatterbox, isn't it?
Yeah, it's difficult to sort of work out how many people you should involve before it gets too many. I think 4 or 5 is about the maximum, really. But yeah, because otherwise it's well, they're all quite respectful and take our own turns and stuff. So I have heard podcasts where people are all talking at once and no one's going to go kind of going no wait. So you do have to kind of let everyone have their turns.
The BBC have a programme for that. It's called Question Time, isn't it?
Oh yes, I think that's they need me to direct it a bit.
Absolutely. Let's have some semblance of normality there, please. And in fact, Yeti Uncle John could, I reckon, could run Question Time. That'd be good.
Yeah. Or I think you may get to have a word with Yeti Uncle John.
Yeah, looking forward to a word with Yeti Uncle John.
Yeah, but I think we're going to talk about films this time, but we're going to talk about like horror mainly. You're going to talk about one of your favourite areas of horror, which is also one of my favourite areas, and I'm going to tell you a bit about some of the Italian horror that I've kind of discovered in the last few years. I haven't discovered it, but I've become more familiar with it. yeah, you were going to have a little chat about Amicus, weren't we?
Oh yes, the one that lives in the shadow of Hammer Films really is Amicus, isn't it? I mean, they're best known for those portmanteau films, where you get 4 or 5 little stories in one film, and I love them because they're so much fun. And if you don't like the one that you're watching at the moment, you wait 10 minutes and another one comes. It's like waiting at a bus station, isn't it? And another one comes along.
Yeah, I mean, I like them so much that years ago, Nick and I did a film which was sort of 4 stories, and although we kind of recorded them separately, the original idea was to do them as a portmanteau film, and we did do an edit where it was with the link. We did linking scenes and everything, but it sort of escaped a little bit its concept because some of the stories were a bit longer than others, and it became some of the films became films in themselves almost. So, but yeah, that was definitely the original inspiration. So I've always liked the Amicus portmanteau films. But.
Yeah, Amicus was always cheaper than Hammer as well, wasn't it? I looked into it when I did one of my first articles, really, for when I was doing my podcast, and I expected 2 great movie moguls to be living in this great office block in the studios, and I found out that they were actually in a shed at Shepperton. It literally was a shed
because it was founded by 2 American producers, wasn't it? Milton Spotsky and Max Rosenberg.
Oh yeah, Matt J. Rosenberg never came over to this country. He was the money man. He was going around shaking the hat in the States, trying to get backing for money. And they worked very much like Hammer did. They used to go around and they used to produce the poster first and said, "This is the film we're going to make next. Look at the poster. Doesn't it look fantastic?" And they go, "Yes, it does," when they haven't even written a word for the script. And that was Milton's job. He was the writer. He used to sort of beg, borrow and steal from other people's books and throw these things together, literally throw them together. And yeah, I like the fact that their brass nerve of going, "This is a film we're going to make," when they haven't even put anything on paper yet.
Because they were also responsible for the 2 60s Doctor Who films, weren't they?
Yeah.
Also with Peter Cushing.
Yeah, they had to change the name of the company because under the hailing of AARRU Films, because if they put it under the name of Amicus, people are going to think, "Oh, this isn't going to be right. A kids' film made for horror by a horror company." And so I thought, we'll soften it a bit. And so they threw in a few letters, and made a title for their production company. And yeah, they managed to get Peter Cushing. They were trying to get Christopher Lee to be in one of them as well. They were looking at Christopher Lee playing the part of Wyler, which initially went to the gentleman who played Professor Quatermass in Quatermass and the Pit the Hammer version, whose name, as usual,
Andrew Keir.
Andrew Keir, the great Andrew Keir. Now, how can I forget that? Maybe, as he would say. But yeah.
It's kind of weird because you might think that, oh well, you've got Hammer, you've got Amicus, but and they'd have kind of the actors wouldn't cross over, but they did, and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were in plenty of Amicus films.
Yeah, they really stamped their mark, haven't they? Chris Lee and Peter Cushing as horror leads, and I think I don't know about you. I think Peter Cushing could make anything look legitimate. He could be spouting the most ridiculous words from the script, but you could buy into that. I never used to sort of buy into the Christopher Lee, because Christopher Lee was his performance was very small and contained, and he was always playing the same sort of grim character, wasn't he? And he never seemed to have a sense of humour, and he always seemed to be very dry and very tall. But then again, you look at something like where he plays Frankenstein's monster, doesn't he, in the Hammer film, and it's all done with the eyes. That taking off of the bandages at the beginning, and the eyes darting around, looking around. But everything, the pain, the anguish, the joy even, all comes through from that acting from the eyes. So I think He's quite electrifying with his eyes, actually, more than anything. But Peter Cushing was always more fun, I thought, than Christopher Lee, because Peter Cushing could really firmly do tongue-in-cheek very well.
Yeah. I was just thinking, going back to the funny thing, that because they did the Portmanteau films, they also did other horror films. So mainly they did horror, but the first two films that Amicus made were like musical comedies. It's Trad Dad.
It's Trad Dad, yeah. Do you know that's Milton Subotsky's best film? He loves that film, absolutely adores it. And Just for Fun, made in 63. So they're made in 62 and 63. And both of them feature Fluff Freeman, the DJ, playing himself. But they are very musical numbers, and that was the thing at the time. We think we don't really have musical numbers these days, do we? But if you think about, you had coming up in the 60s, you had Summer Holiday, you had the Elvis films. So they sort of jumped on that bandwagon. What's the best way to get in cash? What's going to draw people to the cinema and bring in the money to pay for the next film? Let's get some pop stars, because they're cheap. Let's face it, they're cheap, and they will want an up-and-coming pop stars, and they will want that sort of big screen presence and to appeal to a new audience. And I think it's a really great way of doing it. But, then they descended into absolute terror, didn't they?
Well, literally, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors was the first horror one they did, and the first Portmanteau one they did.
Did you like that one? I like that one. That one's... That's really good.
On the train, they were on the train in that one.
On the train, yeah, and they're all in that carriage. I like the makeup Peter Cushing's wearing there. It actually looks as though he could have grown that straggly beard, and it suited him so well.
That's got Alan Freeman in as well, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. It's got Roy Castle in as well, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Roy Castle always said he started his film career by doing two types of films: science fiction and horror. And this is his first film. Although he did appear very briefly in a Second World War film, I think it might have been Dunkirk, where I know Bernard Cribbins first appeared on Dunkirk and had about 2 lines, and he was a worker on one of the boats. But I think, his first blink and you miss it thing. But this is his first real explosive on screen.
He did this in the Daleks film, sort of back to back, because it's the same year. It's that way round, isn't it? Roy Castle's in the first one, and Bernard Cribbins in the.
That's right, yeah. Bernard Cribbins is in the 66 version. And, Doctor Who and the Daleks comes out in 1965. In fact, it's the film after Doctor House of Horrors. So literally, he would have...
They shuffled him off.
Yeah, they would have probably been back to back, to be fair, because they were both made in 65. And knowing how tight Milton Subotsky was... he probably would have wheeled him off at the end of that film when he's totally exhausted. Said, right, away you go, there's Peter Cushing, he's exhausted as well, make a film. Oh, by the way, it's got these pepper pots from Doctor Who on it.
Doctor Who? Because there's also Donald Sutherland in that one, and Kenny Lynch. That's in the
Kenny Lynch, yes.
That's the one that they're in, their main story, is sort of a voodoo one.
That's the voodoo one. That's quite creepy, isn't it? What did you think? Because you've Jeremy Kemp pops up in one as well, doesn't he? Because that's the Killer Vine one. That's the one with Fluff Freeman, isn't it? The Killer Vine. I mean, even Bernard Lee turns up in that. But that almost could be a film on its own, couldn't it? That is begging to be a film on its own.
It reminds me a bit of the because everyone goes on about the Manitou of Surrey Green in the Avengers, but this must have been about almost the same year.
What are we looking at? 65. I think Manitou may have just pipped it. It's the same sort of, but
time.
It's along, and then again, you can put it a bit forward, and then you've got things like Doctor Who and Seeds of Death, haven't you? Seeds of Doom. Sorry, Seeds of Doom. How dare I get that right? Seeds of Doom with the crinoid.
Yeah. Man-eating plants.
Man-eating Little Shop of Horrors. There's a man-eating plant for you.
And that's kind of early 60s, isn't it, as well? Early-ish, or early to mid-60s.
There's a lot of eco stuff here about the world going, I've had enough of these humans, I'm going to eat them.
Yeah. And then you've got, what about a disembodied hand, and one about a vampire? And it's Donald Sutherland is in The Vampire.
Yeah, that's quite weird, because his wife is a vampire, isn't she? And he kills her with a stake, and his psychologist says, yes, I believe you're a vampire. But the twist is, so's his psychologist as well. And his psychologist is played by a very famous actor who assisted to found the Royal Shakespeare Company. And he was in Doctor Who as well. And it's gone, and I mentioned his name. Yes,
Max Adrian?
Max Adrian, yes.
I only know that because I'm looking at Wikipedia.
I'm reaching into my dusty head, and there's a lot of dust in there. But the problem with portmanteaus is they can blend in together. The later ones, like Vault of Horror and From Beyond the Grave, and Tales from the Crypt, they're sort of the same-ish theme, aren't they, of people trapped in a room and discussing the nightmares they've been having.
Yeah, one of my favourites. Well, those later ones are also my favourites, but sometimes and I think they probably often do it in all of them, that they have one that's a little bit lighter or a little bit funnier than the other, and I'm never 100% sure how well those work. I guess you need a bit of a breather sometimes in some of them, but
you sit there and you think, is this supposed to be the funny one? And I always think one of the films in the funny ones is, do you remember when Richard Todd had sliced up his wife and put her in the freezer, but he'd wrapped her in brown paper, and all of a sudden these limbs were coming towards him, wrapped up in brown paper? That was bizarre. But then again, you can go and look at something like Asylum, made in 1972, which I think is possibly the best one they did. I know people will always go, The House that Dripped Blood, with John Pertwee being a vampire by putting on that cape and flying through, and Ingrid Pitts appearing and her two friends. But I think Asylum is the chilling of the lot of them, really. The one.
I shall I'll pin my doodah on the board.
Oh, be careful, sir, it might hurt.
My favourite one is From Beyond the Grave from 74. Although that does have a questionable sort of silly one about a sort of mystic, or who comes in to sort out a spirit, or
oh yeah,
and I think you have to be in the right mood. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes I'm like, just kind of breaking up because the first story in that one is very macabre. With the mirror.
The mirror is a horrible one. The mirror, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I like the thing I like about Beyond the Grave is I like the sort of shop setting that Peter Cushing's playing, like each person who comes in either sort of steals or does him out of the thing that he's buying, or they think they're buying something from his shop and they don't like the price, so they kind of change the price, or they slip it in their pocket, and of course he's noticed, and
the guy from Z Curls tries to, Dixon of Dock Green tries to rob him at the end of it.
I wouldn't recognise him, but is he from there? I see.
Yeah, the guy that he sticks into the pushes into the box with the sword sticking out of it is the detective sergeant in the last series of Dixon of Dock Green. But there is a person who I hope you don't mind me mentioning, particularly if I say the words Ian Ogilvy. Who do you initially think of, the character he plays?
Well, I think of the Saint, obviously.
He's the Saint, isn't he? But the majority of his work in the early
the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s was with horror films. He was a very well-known actor to do horror. Because you were talking about The Mirror, and there's a very similar one regarding a door, isn't there? That enters into this room, and so, but he's known for things like Witchfinder General. That's a horrid, nasty film about the Suffolk witch trials and how much of a con they were. But yeah, he's known quite well for his horror work.
Of course, Tales from the Crypt, one of the most famous stories in that has Joan Collins, which I mean, I love Joan Collins' horror films from the 70s when her career wasn't. One of my favourites is I Don't Want to Be Born, although it's also called The Monster. But I'm sure when I first saw it, it was called I Don't Want to Be Born. It's only the recent versions that I've bought on DVD and Blu-ray that have been called The Monster. But that was the first time I'd heard that title. But yeah, that's a good one. It's a good one for watching at Christmas because she's been stalked around the house by
Father Christmas. Yes,
psychopathics.
Yeah, do you remember the other one in that story with Nigel Patrick in, where he's looking after those people in it's like a charity, and and they've all got disabilities. They're blind, either deaf, and he's taking away their bedding, and they're freezing to death in bed, and so they stick him into this sort of maze with razor blades sticking out. I hate that. And then they let his dog loose after him, and they haven't fed the dog for a week. And it just bear thinking about.
I'm trying to think if that one even has does that even have a funny story?
I mean that one I think is cool. Because no, I don't think I can think of a funny story. No, I can't think of a funny story. What's the Ian Hendry? Oh no, the Ian Hendry one's horrible, isn't it? Isn't he the one who wants to come back from the dead? Or am I missing that with? No, that's where he has the car accident, isn't it? And his face is burnt.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I don't think I can.
Well, maybe it was. It was something they did, with the later ones more. Or, although I don't know, I don't know why I think of the voodoo one as being a funny one. It's not funny at all. It's just it feels funny because you've got two people who are known for light entertainment.
And he's and Roy Castle is very humorous in it.
Yes. Yeah. And I see that in Tales of the Crypt, one called Wish You Were Here is a variation on The Monkey's Paw. But yeah, I was just going to go back to the original list. So we've got Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, and they do Doctor Who and the Daleks. Then they do one called The Skull, which I feel like I probably have seen, but that's not a portmanteau one, though. It's
not. That's Peter Cushing one, Skull.
Yeah. And then they do the Daleks' Invasion of Earth. Then they do one called The Psychopath.
Oh, yes. That was written by the guy who wrote Psycho.
I'm trying to think if I've seen that or not. Probably have. Then there's The Deadly Bees.
It's just exactly how you think it's going to be. Years before we had The Swarm. Michael Caine was desperate for money when he did The Swarm. We had The Deadly Bees. And that's exactly what you're expecting it to be.
but it says it's also an original screenplay by Robert Bloch. So,
yeah. They also use they use
Freddie Francis a lot. He who made The Elephant Man, French Lieutenant's Woman and Cape Fear. He seems to be their stock-in-trade director. So this is before he's really become famous. That the majority of his films were cheap, what I would call cheap turnaround films. And he's cutting his teeth on that to make films like, to think his career's going to go up and up and up, and he's going to come to directing such films as The Elephant Man. It's going to be fantastic.
And then we've got Torture Garden, which is another portmanteau one. It's probably the one I know least, and it's certainly, I think it's the last one I found it quite hard to come by. It wasn't shown on TV, or it wasn't available on Region 2 for a long time, and I did finally get a copy. But
it's a weird one, isn't it? Because it's got Meredith.
Burgess Meredith.
Burgess Meredith, as the devil, Dr. Diablo.
Yeah.
And it's got Jack Palance in as well. I mean, Jack Palance was known for westerns in the States, but it's a very odd. It's not one of my favourites, I must say.
No, I think it's probably one I've only seen once as well.
I think it's probably a good idea.
And now I feel I want to see it again because I haven't seen it for ages. But yeah.
You're
definitely one of the rare ones.
You're coming to two of the worst films ever made by Amicus now on your list.
What, They Came from Beyond Space and The Terranauts?
Yes. Have you seen either of those two?
I feel like I might have. But it may have been wiped from my brain.
Yes, Terranauts is the one with Charles Hawtrey in.
Yes, no, The Terranauts, yes, I have definitely seen that one. I remember you talked about it on your show as well.
Yeah.
And, I have seen that. That's very bizarre because it somehow, like, considering the films that they made before this, it's almost like they just let a party of school children in to direct or something. Everything's just absolutely awful. It's like
it is.
I've been allowed to start directing.
No, you'd make a far better job than the director on those ever did. I mean, they're cheap back-to-backers, and they're literally jumping into the market of just cheap science fiction films. And they are typical twee British science fiction films with no money. And I know Simon Oates is in Terranauts. I think They Came from Beyond Space. Hasn't that got... Oh no, I can't even remember. I'm going to have to look that one up now.
I'm not even sure. It's got a big cast. It's got Michael Gough in it.
Bernard Kay. Yeah, Bernard Kay's the baddie. Wearing the height of sartorial elegance of the late 60s, a polo neck. I'm invading the world wearing a polo neck. I remember that.
Apparently it's got Kenneth Kendall playing Kenneth Kendall.
Yeah, Kenneth Kendall appears on the television news. He's doing a news broadcast.
An early episode of Treasure Hunt. Stop the invasion.
Alec is coming to rescue him from this terrible production. But Kenneth Kendall had a sort of a penchant for doing television or films because he was kidnapped in an episode of Adam and Lives. He was quite happy to do things. Yeah, that was bizarre. He sort of... the people are watching telly. He doesn't even appear as a main sort of set thing. He's on the telly. And it's very weird. It's very weird indeed. But it's a strange film that goes nowhere. And they want to take over the world because their people are dying on their planet, and they want young people to come back and repopulate their world. And... the Earthlings go, no, it's not going to happen. Then they went, all right then. That's the end of the film. And you're thinking, God, if I'd have sat in the audience, I'd been throwing bottles at the screen. And then followed by the Terranauts, I think I'd have lost the will to live.
Yeah.
They're great.
I've definitely seen the Terranauts because of,
And the rubbish robot.
And the fact that... Charles Hawtrey's in it, and it's
he's still playing it as if he's in a carry-on film.
Yeah. But they did. 1967 was a bit of a weird year for Amicus because they did Torture Garden, they did those two, and then Danger Route, which is a spy one, which I definitely haven't seen that. I don't think.
I've not seen Danger Route, and there's very little I can find on Danger Route, to be fair.
Although weirdly, I see it's got Carol Lindley in, who I like. It's got Gordon Jackson. It's got Diana Dawes in. And I usually try and watch anything with Diana Dawes in.
There's nothing wrong with a bit of Diana Dawes. No, I think it's sort of if you think of Danger Route, and it's all I can think of is Danger Man, and they're jumping on that wagon as well, because this would have been the time that spy things like Danger Man would have been doing really well in the TV ratings.
Well, weirdly, it's got a German-American actress called Barbara Boucher in it, who is well known for being in a lot of Italian giallos. So it's interesting to see that she's in this. It's got a good cast. Morris Denham.
Morris Denham was in anything.
Gordon Jackson, Sylvia Sims, and then other people. Even some of the people low down the cast, I recognise the names. But,
I like the fact that Harry Andrews is in it as well. Goodness me. I like the fact that as we go into the 70s and the 60s, the film market is tailing off, and if you haven't jumped from the film market into television drama, you're going to be left behind. And so that's when you find these big stars who were big stars in the 50s and 60s will do anything just to earn a crust. And so you'll be surprised during the portmanteaus who pops up.
The next one, I thought I've mistaken. The next one they released was The Birthday Party, which I don't think I've seen. I think I'm confusing it with... Is there a Betty Davis film called The Birthday or something like that?
Birthday, yeah. No, this is based on the Harold Pinter play, which was not what you would really expect from Amicus.
No.
But apparently it's very good. I haven't actually seen that, but I'm only going from what I've read. But you've got people like Robert Shaw in this. But that would be heavy going, and Patrick Mackie. Dandy Nichols as well pops up in it. Dandy Nichols popped up in a load of stuff in the early 60s as well.
I'm just looking at how many films, like releasing some years, they're releasing 3 or 4 films, and then in 68 they just released The Birthday Party, and in 69, I guess we're sort of coming into it. Some of these films, whether they did very well, and that's why they went back to, because after about 69, that's pretty much all they do is sort of proper horror films or portmanteau films.
Yeah, I think they experimented, especially with the Pinter, and then going on to A Touch of Love, which is directed by the great Waris Hussein. Script there by Margaret Drabble, always a great name, pops up in Monty Python. And people aren't really accepting them. Their audience is not really accepting them for straightforward dramas or kitchen sink dramas in some cases. They really want the horror aspect of things. And I should imagine producing a horror film, you can get it out quite quickly. If you're trying to do a heavy-going drama, it's going to take time, isn't it?
The Mind of Mr. Soames, I feel like I've seen that, but that's more psychological. It's described here as a sci-fi drama, but it is certainly more complicated than... Yeah,
there's a lot of great names in there. You've got Terence Stamp, Nigel Davenport, Robert Vaughan, just to name a few. And he's been in a coma since a brain injury. So for his 30 years he's been in a coma, and he's still got the behaviour of a child. So that's the main meat of the film, and how he's coping with life, and how he comes out of this coma and then has to find out that there's more to life than he's expecting, and what he's missed out on.
Yeah, it says it wasn't a success at the box office, but it's probably it's probably a little bit. It's not an outright horror film. It's not.
No.
It's again.
So far we've had spy movies Harold Pinter Plays, kitchen sink dramas, and psychological melodrama, if you like. Which is, it just doesn't fit the Amicus mould, does it? Could be worse. It could be Trad Dad too.
The next up, they do go back to sort of, well, it's described as sci-fi conspiracy thriller, Scream and Scream Again. It does sound, the title does sound more like it's going to be either an outright horror or a portmanteau film, but it's not.
No, but although I know you got Chris Lee in it, you got Vincent Price in it, and Peter Cushing. Although the three of them don't actually meet in that, but yeah, it's a bit of a hodgepodge, that one, and it's another one. It's a cheaply made one because it's made in modern times, and it's easier to just shoot modern films than it is period pieces.
I suppose I should probably say that one of the things I always liked about Amicus, particularly the portmanteau films, was that they were set in the contemporary times, because that's one of the things that I don't always have the patience for with Hammer is all of the period costume. I have to be in the right mood for that. It's the same with Dark Shadows. I like all the episodes. I'm more interested in the episodes set in the current day, because I'm just interested in seeing everyone dressed in the 60s and 70s stuff, and I'm less impressed when they get their big frocks out. But that's just me, though. It's not wrong. It's not bad. It's just...
Well, now and again, getting their big frocks out, I suppose, is a nice thing. But after a while, you can tire of a big frock now and again.
Yeah. It just doesn't suit me.
But I haven't got the legs.
After Scream and Scream Again, this is when we come back to the House That Dripped Blood.
Yeah, we come back to what is their staple, really, don't we?
Yeah. And Lisa discussed that one, so we won't talk about that one too much. She discussed that in an episode we did quite recently, where she was teaching us about various horror films from this period. But and then we got I, Monster, which was that's sort of their version of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, in a way, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's again, it's a Cushing and Lee double-hander.
It's got Mike Raven in, who was that? Wasn't he a DJ? He's in some horror films. I think he's in one of Nick's favourites. He's in Crucible of Terror, which I think is one of his favourites.
Yeah, he used to be a radio disc jockey. He was a sculptor and a sheep farmer.
Yeah.
So yeah, he would have been known to. He'd have been known to the audience. Of course, you got Richard Herndl in this as well.
Yeah.
Susan Jameson, she'd have been known a lot. She would have been doing loads on TV. She was. I don't think she was ever out of work during the 70s. She was always on telly.
Anytime I'm talking to my mum about Doctor Who, we talk about Leela, my mum always gets Louise and Susan Jameson confused. I have to go, no, it's Louise, not Susan.
But this film was originally going to be made in 3D. I don't know if you knew that, but it didn't come out as they wanted it to, and so when they shoot 3D films, because you're either got things coming out to the camera or somebody's pointing a sword directly at you and things like that, and it wasn't quite gelling for them to do it in 3D, so they never reduced it as 3D. This didn't do very well at all at the box office. They just the critics weren't very fair to this film, and they said it was it's a complete hash at Jekyll and Hyde, which is a shame, really, because looking at the names that appear in it, it's not what you're expecting. But then again, if you're looking at the 70s now, the world of horror is going downhill somewhat, isn't it? I mean, Hammer now are not producing the quality of films that would stimulate the mind, and things are now going towards more gore, aren't they? More bloodfest than, say, some of the more conservative traditional horror films.
The trouble is now it's hard to sort of know how the different sort of films and directors, how well they, what were Amicus's competition other than Hammer, because I know of other British horror directors of this time, but I know them. Like I was thinking of, and sometime we'll have to have a discussion or about the director Pete Walker, who started off doing sort of more sort of late 60s sort of psychological type things, but then in the 70s made a lot of horror films. And I was thinking of the Flesh and Blood show from 1973, from 1972, that has a 3D section. But which you can, it's produced on the DVD with you can watch it either way, but unless you've got the glasses, it doesn't really work. But that's sort of like an early slasher film. But I just don't know how well Pete Walker, I don't know how well his films were.
Yeah, it's a bit like Tony Tenser. Tony Tenser founded Tygon Films. And they're known for Witchfinder General, a couple of other low-budget films like The Blood Beast Terror, which is Peter Cushing's, in his words, his worst film he ever made. They made The Sorcerers, which had Boris Karloff in, which was rather weird. The Beast in the Cellar.
Yes.
Ever heard of The Beast in the Cellar with your favourite Beryl Reid? Yes. And then you've got Zoe Herriot from Doctor Who showing off her wobbly bits in 1971 on the very controversial Blood on Satan's Claw. That's actually a really, really good film. It comes with a lot of precursors of there is a nasty rape scene, and it is filmed in quite a disturbing way. But the whole idea of finding this skull with an eye in it, and the eye of the devil is everywhere, and the eye of the devil is watching this small, isolated farming community. It's wonderfully done. So yeah, I'd say Tygon Films is another one, but they didn't last too long.
And I'm not even sure if Pete Walker who distributed his films. He's more a director who did a lot of horror films but he worked with people like Stephanie Beacham quite early on in her career, and I read her autobiography recently, and I wondered, considering she went off to America, and I was wondering whether she'd even want to talk about those sorts of films. But she did. Not endlessly, but she seemed to have enjoyed working with Pete Walker. But anyway, we should get back to.
The other thing with you bring that up with Stephanie Beacham, but if you look at a majority of sort of stars that were up and coming stars like Stephanie Beacham, they cut their teeth on these small little films that would pop up now and again. And as you say, some of them sort of stick their head in the sand and go, no, I wasn't in that. And you look at some of them and go, yeah, I'll talk about Dracula AD 1972, I don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like that because of it being contemporary, even though it's not probably the best Dracula film. It piques my interest because of it being set in the 70s.
It gets a terrible padding, but I really do like that film. I like the soundtrack because it's really groovy, and it's so left field. And Christopher Neame is just so camp in it, and he's got that huge fedora hat and drives around with a sports car. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, he's. But Chris Lee does hardly anything. He wanders on, looks, bites a few people, walks off, and you can understand now that he's getting sick and tired of sort of playing that character, can't you? But I do love that film. It's just crazily and stupid, and I love it.
So just going through some of the other Amicus films, we've got What Became of Jack and Jill, which it says here that they were trying to compete with Hammer by doing slightly more, something a bit more. I don't know. They describe it as sort of
psychological.
Breaking into the grindhouse market.
It didn't work very well, that film, unfortunately. It sort of fell on its face, but I think they were just trying to extend their portfolio, and when companies do that, they've tried that earlier, didn't they? They tried it with Birthday Party and A Touch of Love.
I bet they were trying to, because it looks like it's the same sort of year as Straight On Until Morning.
Yeah.
The Hammer film, which is one of my favourite Hammer films. I'm not even sure if how well that's regarded or whether it's not regarded well, but I really like Straight On Until Morning. It's really quite bleak, but quite... Well,
but that's you find in the 70s there are a lot of films or TV programmes were rather bleak. Because we'd just come out of a period of what people saw as austerity and colour and excitement, and all sorts of things were happening in the 60s. The pill, miniskirts, fondue haircuts, drugs, all sorts of things. And the world was changing. And then all of a sudden it hit the 1970s and we were driving knackered Ford Cortinas and wearing kipper ties and beige shirts. Life was over for people in the party world because everything became beige, didn't it? Beige or light brown. And so I can imagine people thought, the 70s are a bit bleak. But I was reading some ridiculous piece of journalism the other day saying that the 1970s in the 20th century were the most happiest time. I can't believe that. I've seen the fashions. I mean, the kids, we had to play with clackers, which could probably maim a child at 10 metres. And we were eating food that was 90% plastic.
Well, I remember potatoes being all stringy, unless they just... My mum and dad just grew potatoes and used string in this.
String was a thing.
But I just remember potatoes being sort of,
or coming out of a packet and you putting hot water in them to expand them.
Yeah. So they did 3 portmanteau films in a row. They did Tales from the Crypt in 72, Asylum in 72, and Vault of Horror. I should probably talk about Vault of Horror because I don't think we've mentioned that yet. That's the one with Tom Baker.
Yes, the year before he was Who.
Yeah. Terence Alexander from Bergerac. Mike Pratt. Daniel Massey, Anna Massey.
That's the weird one, yes. Because she actually plays his sister in this, doesn't she? And she's a vampire. And
that's good. That's
I think that's
one
the
of the ones I
funny
remember
one.
Best.
Yeah, I think that's the funny one where they hang him upside down and stick they stick some kind of tap in his neck so they can drink his blood. Oh, and there's the Terry Thomas one, isn't there?
That's the one you were talking about with the parcel.
No, that's the one with the parcel. No, that was Richard Todd. Terry Thomas is the one who's methodical about everything being done at the right time, and he keeps everything in the right jars, and they're all labelled up. And he ends up being taken apart by his new wife because she's got sick to death of it, and she puts all his body parts into carefully labelled jars downstairs, so it looks like it's exactly the same as what he would do if he took somebody apart.
Then there's the Indian rope trick one, which that's quite
disturbing, isn't it? It's the screaming sound. There's a lot of screaming in that. Kurt Jürgens is that, isn't he? I'd only known Kurt Jürgens for 2 films till I saw this. One of them was a musical, and the other one was the James Bond film, A Spy Who Loved Me. He lives in the underwater city.
And then there's one about an insurance scam. Is that the one where somebody's in a grave?
That's right. Yes, and we've got
that's kind of got a funny ending, really, in a way.
Yeah, because at that moment in time you had the Doctor in the House TV series, and of course there's Robin Nedwell and Jeffrey Davis who'd appeared in these Doctor sitcom type things, and they were medical students, weren't they? And they were after a human cadaver to study.
Yeah, and then the one about the painting with Tom Baker and Jennifer Elliott, that's a good one. That's almost like a voodoo type one in a way.
That's a scary one, that one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It's difficult. Thought Horror is probably another favourite of mine.
But these stories are all lifted from the comics, aren't they? They're just reworking of the comic stories from Vault of Horror.
Then we've got And Now the Screaming Starts.
Yes.
That's got Stephanie Beachman. That's not a portmanteau one, is it?
No.
I think that's like a family estate type.
Yeah,
well, I have seen it, but I can't remember that much about it.
Yeah, this is Ian Ogilvy as well. It's directed by a Hammer director, Roy Ward Baker. I mean, there is a director that's never out of work. But yeah, it's about on her wedding night, she's attacked and raped by an evil spirit in her bedroom. Yeah. It's written by Roger Marshall, actually. He of Avengers fame. But yes, it's a story of mental health illness and her psychiatric disorders and how she turns a bit nasty with it.
And then we've got the last portmanteau proper from Beyond the Grave.
Yeah.
Madhouse, which is with Vincent Price. I only saw that relatively recently. It's almost like Dr. Phoebes 4.
Is it? I've never seen it. I'd like to see it. It's in one of my boxes somewhere. I haven't got round to watching it yet.
It's about a horror actor. So I suppose that's the only reason in the same way as he plays an actor in Theatre of Blood.
The next one on your list is my most watched Amicus DVD. It's one of my favourites.
Is that The Beast Must Die?
The Beast Must... What a title! The Beast Must Die. And we have the Werewolf Hour.
Yeah. It stops in the middle or towards the end and you have to guess.
Yeah.
It's like a mixture of a werewolf film and then the nun, and that you're not quite sure who's the werewolf, and they kind of invite you to...
It's guess. Agatha Christie with werewolves. It is. The werewolf did it, but which one is the werewolf? But there's so many names in this. And I like the fact that they were very bold. You had Calvin Lockhart and Marlene Clark as his wife were the leads. And they're people of colour, and it was something other than sort of films other than Shaft that you never saw that on. But I just love the fun. We got Peter Cushing that does very little, to be fair. You got Charles Gray, Anton Differing, not being a Nazi for once. Tom Chapman and Michael Gambon, yeah.
Valentine Dahl, but he's playing the werewolf breaking.
He's the voice, isn't he? He's the man in black, but he's doing the voice for the werewolf. Yeah. But this film is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And you think, so a guy holds a dinner party because he's a very rich prize hunter, and he wants to bag himself a werewolf.
As you do.
As you do. And he's used all sorts of technology to bag this werewolf. And it doesn't quite end the way you expect it to do, does it?
Well, that's the good thing for me, is that at the very minute I can't remember how it ends, which also always suggests to me that I need to watch it again, because as soon as I can forget major twists in films, which sometimes takes up to 5 years, that's the sort of time to go back and watch them again. So I like to watch films having forgotten a lot of the twists. So.
For some bizarre reason, this film always reminds me of going to the pub with friends in London, and we'd end up talking horror films, and we'd always, all of us sat around the table, would just say, best film's got to be The Beast Must Die. It's just ridiculously silly. It's not a classic. The acting is odd, and sometimes. And the setting's just bizarre. but it's such a lovely film to watch.
Isn't the werewolf just some dog?
Yes. It's a dog with like a fluffy collar on.
Yeah, I kind of almost wish it had just been a man dressed as a dog, but maybe not. We're gonna move on to Italian films in a minute, but we want to mention the last three because they released, and these were quite successful. The Land That Time Forgot, At the Earth's Core, and The People That Time Forgot.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not sure if they were all as successful as each other, but they.
Doug McClure.
I did watch at least one or two of those when they were on telly relatively recently. But Anthony Amy's in The Land That Time Forgot.
Mm-hmm.
He, those who don't know, played the Master in Doctor Who, but many people will know that.
This is Carolyn Munro is in At the Earth's Core as well. Now, Carolyn Munro didn't do many Amicuses at all. I think she only did a couple of Amicuses. She was very much a Hammer actress. I love Carolyn Munro.
And she did quite a lot of. She did a few slasher films in the 80s as well.
She's one of these actresses that is very generous when she comes to describing the films that she was in. She knows they were low budget, they weren't blockbuster films, and she didn't have a fantastic part. She was there to look glamorous, but she would never talk. She never talks the films down. That's what I love about Carolyn Munro. You'll get other people who've gone on to be massive stars who, I don't want to talk about that. That was a terrible film, but Carolyn is just wonderful, and she has such a wonderful air about her even now.
Now, we need to do a footnote because although Amicus sort of ended after those three films, there were two other portmanteau films that Milton Spotsky did. One's The Uncanny from 1977, which is all sort of cat-themed. I have seen that. I remember not being 100% impressed with that when I saw it.
Didn't do very well, apparently.
Yeah. But the other one that they made, the other one that Milton Spotsy was involved with, was The Monster Club in 1980. And I love that film.
Not seen that one.
What I love about it is that it's a mixture of... it was directed by Roy Ward Baker. It starred Vincent Price and John Carradine. But it's basically set at it's set at a club, and you get songs between the stories, like sort of new wave bands, and I really like it.
All you had to say was John Carradine, and I know what type of film we're going to get.
It's got Brick Eklund in, Simon Ward, Patrick McGee, Anthony Valentine, Jeffrey Belden. And Donald Pleasance. I think you need to see this.
I think I do, actually, yes. I do need to see this.
But yeah, I need to watch it again. I think I've got 2 copies of it somewhere. I think there's 3 stories, but that's probably fair enough. But with the setting of the club as well, and the music, that's probably, the songs probably take up what would the space of a story otherwise. But I remember enjoying the music as well, because it's sort of early 80s sort of music and stuff.
Hello again, listeners, it's me, Cuthbert the Robot. Before the conversation moves on to another area of horror films, we have another new track for you from our composer-in-residence, Muffley on Tour. His latest song is called Marvivo 3, and we think you're going to enjoy it. Paul thought that this new piece definitely had an unsettling and scary vibe in places, and it reminded him of some of the Italian horror that he is about to discuss with Warren. Thank you, Muffley, for allowing us to debut your new tune on the Shy Life podcast. Listeners, have a listen, and afterwards we will head over to Italy for some spine-chilling chat!
talk about 3 Italian directors. I suppose about 12 years ago, I started listening to a podcast called The Hysteria Continues, who talk about slasher films. So I really like things like Friday the 13th and Halloween and all that. And when I was at university, I used to go to Blockbusters and I'd buy, you know how Blockbusters would, although they rented videos, they would sell like £5 copies of Evil Dead or whatever. They had their range, and I tended to go there and buy, instinctively wanted to buy things rather than borrow them. So I sort of had got into slasher films, or sort of 70s and early 80s horror films, but there's lots I hadn't seen, and listening to this podcast got me into a lot of slasher films, but it also opened up to me the fact that there were a lot of sort of what are known as like proto-slashers, and lots of sort of European horror and Italian horror, giallos, and there was so much more out there than what I knew about. And I guess I could talk all day about the giallo side of it, but I thought I'd pick on 3 directors who are known for doing different sorts of horror, and also people like Christopher Lee sort of pop up. So we've got Mario Bava, who made a sort of, he started in the 60s, but one of his one or two of his films were sort of portmanteau type films. There was one called Black Sunday.
I've heard Black Sunday.
Yeah, and I think Black Sabbath is a portmanteau one.
Yes, Black Sabbath is. Yeah. Can I ask a question about Italian films? Are they horror films? When you talk about the slasher, are they more gorier than you would say for European?
Well, they become more gory as the decades go. I'm not sure how gory they were I'm not sure if they were any more gory in the early 70s, say, than the Hammer or the Amicus. They may have been a little bit more. But I'm trying to think of the one that there's the Girl That Knew Too Much. That's got John Saxon in it. That's set in Rome. But I'm pretty sure that Mario Bava did. I think he did sort of films that he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And although the films that I've tended to see of his have been from the 60s and 70s, he was involved in filmmaking going back to the 30s. I think there are films that he made for himself and films that he made for money. He made Dr. Goldfoot and the Girl Bombs, which is a sort of a 1966 Euro spy comedy film. And I think that was quite out of his. I think that's got Vincent Price in. Mm-hmm. Yes, that was sort of more of a Hollywood movie. Then there were sequels. I think it's one of those things where it was filmed in Italy, but I think there was probably American money behind it. And I don't think he would say that he would have said that was something he did by choice, or to a certain extent it wasn't his idea. A good example. Oh no, here we go. Here's the Christopher Lee one. I've never seen this one. It's called The Whip and the Body. It's a gothic horror film, and Christopher Lee was in that.
Yes, the Whip in the Body was being reviewed by a podcast or a video cast called Dark Corners recently, and that's an extremely odd film and quite sadistic film. Yeah,
the film he made after that, Blood and Black Lace, is a really good one. That's sort of like that's set at a fashion house and people being bumped off. but it's very stylistic, and that thing is a lot of these. It's got Cameron Mitchell in, but mostly the cast is Italian. But that's a very good one. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. There are. He did quite a lot. There's one called $5 from an August Moon, which a lot of people seem to like, but it's sort of it's set on an island again. People being bumped off. We're into like 1970 at this stage, but for some reason, and I'm sure there is a reason, I can't remember off the top of my head. Virtually the whole of the film, you sort of see the build up to the characters being killed off, but you don't see the actual killings, and you just see the bodies, and it always feels to me like there's something missing, because you don't see the sort of the fun bit. I mean, not fun bit.
Yeah,
you don't see the gory bit, and I always feel that I can't fully embrace it because it's not. It just feels like it's been edited, and it's not. And I think it was the intention, but I can't quite remember why. Whether it was a money issue, because I guess a lot of those sorts of scenes are quite expensive to. You know, if you're going to do some sort of gory set piece, then sometimes that costs a lot of money to make the special effects look good. But
well, if you're going to have more than one set piece, with a lot of gore, it's you've got to even it out, and that sometimes, as you say, that can lose the impact, can't it?
Yeah. Now, another of his films, which is interesting, is called A Bay of Blood from 1971, and that is almost Friday the 13th, but about 7 years before. It's set by a lake, characters being killed off. There's sort of there's whodunit elements. That's definitely one of my favourites of his. Now, the thing about Italian directors is they're often very keen on jumping on the bandwagon of something that was like something that was big. So Lisa and the Devil is the name of the film, and it's due to the popularity of The Exorcist. We talked about Telly Savalas, and he's in that.
Yes. Right.
He's in that with Elke Sommer, she's in one of the later Carry On films, isn't she? I think.
Yes, she is. Yeah.
I have a feeling that Telly Savalas is playing a sort of devil character, but so there's one version of the film, but then there was a re-edit, The House of Exorcism, where they added exorcist scenes in it to try and repackage it. And I've not necessarily, it's not necessarily a recommendation, but it's definitely a curiosity.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at the poster for it, and to look at the poster, you'd be looking at that going, well, actually, that looks like a rock and roll film, because it's got this, a young lady in the short skirt looking as if she's dancing, but then over her shoulder, you've got this maniacal look of absolute anger from Telly Savalas. And it's just such a weird poster that
I can't remember how much supernatural there was in the Lisa and the Devil. I guess some, but certainly no exorcisms. But you know, there are quite a lot of examples where there's a film I love called Alien 2, which was
yes,
made. Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
It was made between Alien and Aliens.
Yes.
And they were. I absolutely adore it. I mean, it has some good things to recommend it because it was filmed in I think a real cave system.
Yeah.
So some of it looks quite good, but there were sort of obvious alien cash-ins. Instead of a chest bursting alien, there's I can't remember, does it come out of his back or it comes out? But it's done very badly, but good, but in a great way.
It's done really badly, yeah.
Yeah. But it also reminds me of a season 2 episode of Space 1999, and only slightly gorier, probably.
Something like the Demon's Domain.
I think it's I'm sure it's one of Tarantino's favourite films. I'm not sorry, Quentin, if that's not the case, but I'm sure a lot of these a lot of these Italian films, Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, he does like those type of films, doesn't he?
And often sort of uses the music from them in his own films as a sort of tribute.
The first time I watched this, I misheard. I wasn't really paying that much attention to the main character, Thelma Joyce, and I thought her name was Eutha Joyce. And all I got fixated was I was waiting for the George and Mildred theme to arrive. But yeah, I mean, I've recently got a Blu-ray copy of one of Barbara's last films, Shock. That's more of a sort of ghosty type film. And there was a film of his called Rabid Dogs, which I think he made and abandoned, but then got sort of re-edited after his death. And I was really impressed with that. That not a horror film at all, much more like a Tarantino film. And I was kind of really glad that they. It's got some nice twists in it. I was kind of glad that I'd seen that. If that's a lost film and it's as good as that, then it's definitely worth keeping an eye out for it. Now, another director I wanted to mention is Lucio Fulci. Now, he is very gory in places, but he also starts off doing sort of more psychological thrillers, and again, he's been around doing all sorts of sort of swashbuckling type films and all sorts in the 50s and 60s, but it was more in the later 60s when the Giallo. Sorry, Dealey's here now. Hi, Deals. Hi, Deals.
Yeah, it's Uncle Warren. We're not playing computer games today. You can still stay, though. You smell like a hot water bottle, Deals. Ow. Ow. You're treading on my earphone and my... Yeah, sorry. Yes, you can stay. He did some sort of... Oh, Deals. Ow. I'm just going to sit down. I'm just going to knock your microphone away, he says. He did... The ones I sort of first became aware of were the Giallos, a lizard in a woman's skin.
I was just about to say, I'm looking at that on my list in front of me. Is it as bizarre as it sounds?
It's quite bizarre. It's also interesting because it's filmed in London, and including in Belgrave Square where I used to work, and you can see the college where I used to work. There back in 1971 or whenever it was filmed. So there's that sort of side of it that's interesting. A lot of those sort of films are often, main female lead being made to think that they are going mad and it's often somebody, one of their family, that's trying to sort of.
I know it's got Stanley Baker in it as well.
But as the decade went on, he then started making sort of zombie movies, and there's a trilogy of films called City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, and The House by the Cemetery, which are pretty gory, but I do really like them. They're a bit they're rather strange because they've got the same female lead, but she's not playing the same character. It's all very dreamlike. I think that's how I've heard it described. Is those films are almost like a nightmare. They don't necessarily make complete sense, and they're very sort of very odd.
I'm looking at the last two directors, pictures of the last two directors, and they come across as meek and mild old gentlemen. I'm not expecting them to be psychos, but they're not. If you could sit next to them on the bus or on the tube, and you just wouldn't bat an eyelid. There's just a nice gentleman sat next to me. Actually, he's redesigning his latest slasher film.
and Fulci also did a version of the the Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Black Cat. And sort of that had Patrick McGee in, David Warbeck, and
is that A Cat in the Brain?
No, that's something else. That's a weird. I've not seen that, but I know that's one that he made towards the end of his life, and it's sort of a mixture of almost autobiographical stuff with a strange story. And
oh yes, Black Cat, 1981. Yeah.
I think that's also got the lady who's the lead in that trilogy as well, because it was made between the first and second film. The New York Ripper is quite from '82 is quite controversial because that's quite violent, I guess. And the killer, you hear the killer on the phone, and he sounds like Donald Duck. He's got a quacking. so it's, if the film wasn't so violent, then it would probably be funnier than it'd probably be as funny as it sounds. But it's more disturbing.
I don't know what to say to that.
No.
I'm looking at the poster. The poster looks quite hard hitting. But for you to, all I can hear now is Donald Duck and his nephews in the background slaughtering someone.
I think probably his later films are sort of, he had because Bava died, I think, in the very early 80s, whereas I think Fulci died in the mid 90s, and I think he continued making films pretty much until he died, but the money wasn't there. But he did a couple of like Conan the Barbarian type films, Warriors of the Year 2072 being one of them. I think that's one I might have seen. But Murder Rock, that's because of course he started off doing The Odd Shallow, but by the 80s the slasher things come around, so Murder Rock's sort of more like a slasher. And then there's one called Enigma, which is about snails. I describe that. There's snails.
Is that a horror film?
It's a horror film, yeah.
Is it sort of in the vein of Frogs or The Night of the Lepus or something like that?
Maybe, yeah. And a bit sort of supernaturally, and it's just so difficult to put into words. I think I quite like it.
Yeah,
but
that's certainly left field. I wouldn't be expecting homicidal snails.
Yeah, I can't quite remember how the snails come into it. I'm not sure. I feel they're being controlled by somebody else. But so I should finish off with probably possibly the most famous of these directors. We've got Dario Argento, who is still alive and making films to this day, although he's 82, I think. But he hasn't really had a big hit though since the early 90s, but did have a lot of. I guess his sort of biggest period was the 70s into the early 80s, but he was involved with sort of giallo films to start with: The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, The Cat of Nine Tails, Four Flies on Grey Velvet. They always have these lovely names.
I was going to say they have such beautiful names, whereas we have like Volta Terra. But yeah, they have such beautiful theatrical names. It just alludes to so much more, doesn't it?
But Bird with the Crystal Plumage is about somebody who witnesses a murder in an art gallery, but as it goes on, you realise that it's not quite what you've seen, what you think you've seen, or he realises. It's got Susie Kendall in it. She was in quite a lot quite a few Italian films. This is Susie Kendall, who was married to Dudley Moore. Although, yeah, she was doing these films when she was still married to him, so he was probably elsewhere doing things himself. But yeah, Susie Kendall is in a surprising amount of horror films.
Do you find that a lot of well-known English-speaking actresses and actors are drawn to appear in Italian or Spanish horror? Is it because of the quality of it?
I'd say it was. I don't know. I'd say it was more that it was nice weather rather than I don't know how much them. I'm not sure how much money they'd have got, but I wouldn't be surprised that whether the work was there. I suppose. One of my favourite films that Susie Kendall in is called Torso, which is the nearest thing I can think of to an Italian. It's like a cross between a slasher movie before slashers were even invented, really, and an Alfred Hitchcock film. Because the first half of the film, the students are being bumped off, and then at the second half of the film, some of the surviving girls have gone to this house in the country, well, I can't say too much, but things don't go too well, and Susie Kendall ends up being about the only person who's still alive, but the killer doesn't know that she's in the house, and she's trying to. She's sort of sprained her ankle, so she's not able to run, and she's not sure who the killer is. She just knows they're suspects at this point, and it's just a really nice mixture of. So that's sort of you can sort of. It feels very Hitchcocky, that half of the film, and it's got one of the first half of the film has got one of my favourite sort of scary, stalky type scenes where there's a girl who leaves a party which is on the edge of some sort of like a marsh, I suppose, and she realises she's being followed, and she runs into the marsh, but the killer has like a the sort of white face mask that like a motorcyclist might wear under his helmet. I'm not sure what you call it.
Oh, balaclava type thing.
Sort of, but yeah. So you don't. It's just very atmospheric, and it's all filmed when she's running through the marsh. It's all misty, so you keep seeing that. You can't quite see how close the person is getting to her, and it's a really tense sort of scene.
In comparison, then, say with English and American horror of the time, are they a better to equate? Is it not fair to equate your Italian horror to your Westernised American and British horror? Is it unfair to equate the two because they're of such differing styles?
In a way. In a way, I sort of also feel that the Italian films are a bit more like the experimental sort of Pete Walker-y type films that were lower budget, and because they're not having to sort of. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that American films have got quite so formulaic back in that sort of period, but they were doing their own thing, really. I'm not sure that other than The Exorcist. Does The Exorcist count as an American movie, or is it a British movie, or I'm not sure.
Americanish movie, isn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, then you're kind of getting big blockbusters like Jaws and big, and the sort of Owen Allen disaster movies. Feels like what was going on was the horrors that were that in the early 70s were probably lower budget. Or the Italian ones, again, they were. I think I've heard people sort of say a lot of the Italian movies, you kind of went to the cinema to catch up with your friends and have how much people were actually watching the films seems to be debatable. So whether they've had a lot more attention on them in the preceding years. I'm not sure. I think it was more of a social thing rather than people watching it completely sort of silent.
I asked that question because you look at things and you go back to, if we turn the clock right back to the days of Bela Lugosi being Dracula in his first appearance in Dracula in the early 30s. I mean, you had a Spanish, during the day they were filming the American version, and in the evening the Spaniards came on and used the same set, paid to use the same set, and filmed their version of Dracula. And to a certain extent, their version of Dracula is way, way above the Universal version. Yeah, there was just a different style about it, such a more evocative style than perhaps what became, in the the treadmill.
Dubbing on Italian movies is an episode in itself, really. I mean, I quite like some bad dubbing anyway.
Bad dubbing can make the quality, can make the film more than the actual film itself.
Yeah. Coming towards the end, but I just want to finish just talking about 2 or 3 other Argento films. You've got you've got Deep Red, which is I guess that's described as a giallo, but that's just a good thriller, and that's got David Hemmings in, but mainly an Italian cast. That's another one where you sort of you uncover things as you go along, and you also realise you saw the killer about halfway through the film, had you only realised that that's what you were seeing.
But that's the genius of making such a wonderful film, though, isn't it? If you can structure it around that, I'm sure everything. The best way to put a killer in a film is to put them in plain sight, isn't it? But it takes a certain style to be able to do that.
There's also different cuts of that film, longer and shorter versions. I think the things that are different, I don't think it's a gore thing so much. I think it's more in the longer cut. Well, I mean, it might be the odd thing, but I think they put more the sort of relationship between the 2 main leads was explored a bit more. So you felt so it's sort of. I'm not quite sure what territories got what, but obviously so one cut probably didn't explore that quite as much because they probably thought people weren't that interested. They just wanted to get to the next murder. But it's quite nice to have 2 different versions that are different in and those have really good set pieces. When the people get killed off, there's some quite sort of surreal set pieces that are really good. And you've got Suspiria, which it has been remade quite recently. That's more of a supernatural. That's set in a sort of a girls' dance school, and that's sort of a hybrid between a sort of supernatural film and a giallo, where people are being killed off, but it's not quite as simple as a. That's definitely. I think that's probably the first Argento film I saw. I mean, he at this time he was really good with like colour palettes, and they're beautiful. Not only they're set pieces, but they're beautiful films to watch and very quite stylised. There was a sort of sequel called Inferno in 1980, although it's more to do with, well, let's just say in Suspiria, the school, there were witches in the school, and Inferno has more about another lot of witches. And then many years later, because it was supposed to be a trilogy, but they didn't make the third one till many years later. But the third one wasn't up to the first 2. Then three more very briefly. You've got Tenebrae from 1982. That's very much a sort of, I guess it's still a giallo, but it's also just a thriller really. It's and again lots of really sort of intricate set pieces and there's like shots where the camera kind of goes through windows and round buildings and up floors and it's all done as far as you can tell in one shot. Things that sort of like Hitchcock did, but almost an extension from that. John Saxon, Dario Nicolodi. That's Argento's wife.
Yeah.
That's another favourite. Then you've got Phenomena, which is that's a sort of more supernatural one. But that's got Donald Pleasance in playing a sort of, I guess, a sort of scientist, a professor, and it's got Jennifer Connelly in it when she was,
goodness me,
quite young.
Yeah.
And it also has a chimpanzee with a flick knife at one point. It's quite something. Phenomena is known as Creepers in the States, and I think that's a shorter cut. Donald Pleasance did lots of Italian horror films. Sometimes he really just
Phenomenon, 1985.
Sometimes he just turned
like
up.
The idea a monkey just turned up. He was in the studio, not invited, so he just turned up.
No, he was invited.
Well, yeah, he fell into this sort of genre, didn't he? Quite by accident when he started off doing things like Halloween.
Yeah,
but
he kept going back to do other Halloween ones later on as well. The last Argento film that I really rate probably is called Opera from 1987. That's sort of murders again.
Yeah.
Although it was sort of it was released as Terror at the Opera. It has some really good set pieces in it, and though it has a bit of a strange ending tacked on, or it feels like a bit tacked on, set in Switzerland after you think the killer's been killed. But these films are known for those sort of false endings. But the most famous name probably in opera who isn't Italian is Ian Charleston, who was known for Chariots of Fire, but he although that was a really big film for him, he didn't necessarily follow up with lots of bigger successes, and by 87 was doing Italian horror films, which probably wasn't the way he expected his career to go, but he had quite a tragic life anyway. But I really like him in the Italian horror films I've seen him in. But yeah, I think I could say a lot more, and I think talking about Amicus and then Italian films is quite worlds apart from one another. But
they are worlds apart.
But they do cross over. But they do cross over, which is with some of the actors and
some of the content theme as well. I think is Amicus does has a tendency, when it does gore, it can be a bit comical gore, whereas Italian do straight gore. I take it this is done as not on a humorous level. Is always done as gore, and we're showing you because this is reality rather than use it as a humorous touch. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it can be that step beyond what you'd see over in the UK or America, because of what they go, particularly with the sort of zombie movies and the Fulci films. They are a step on from what you're used to seeing in most horror films.
Do you think then that they've got more of a following over here now because the DVD market opens up, whereas these would have been in the release times in the sort of 70s and 80s would have been seen as rather niche movies.
Well, I also think some. I can't remember which ones exactly, but certainly some of the films of Fulci, and I'm not sure about Argento, but certainly Fulci. Some of those would have been on the banned films list with video nasties.
Yeah.
Because of course, when that case was in Parliament, I've since read that rather than taking each film individually and showing how the concept or how the gory scene fitted in, they just showed the MPs I don't know how many hours or minutes worth of just like a compilation of all the worst bits.
Oh,
so
there's no context in anything.
There's no context.
Shown, no.
Yeah, so you're going to you're going to come away thinking, well, that's awful, disgusting sort of thing, because you've just been exposed to hours worth of or you know, a lot of those scenes all at once, which is not how they're supposed to be seen. Anyway, Warren, thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you for inviting me. I've now got more to go and build on my DVD collection.
Yes, yeah. Well, I hope you. If you need any more advice, we'll have to get you back anyway to talk about.
I'd love to come back. No, that's great. Thank you very much again for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And listeners, thank you for listening.
Yes,
and
thank you.
We'll be back again soon. And we'll say goodbye for now. Okay, bye-bye for now.
I gotta go now. Bye.
I want to go with you.
Gotta go. Bye.
Goodbye, 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 goodbye.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear, what's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Let's go.
I have a voice. I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice. We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
Warren, is that you?
Hello, Yeti Uncle John. Oh, Yeti, I'm standing up. I'm standing to attention. It's Yeti Uncle John. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be here. I heard you were in the studio. It's nice to see you, and I believe that Mr. Poole he plays with you in that game, that Fortnite game. I played that.
He does play. He's rather good at playing with me in that game. Actually, he's got a sleight of hand that can't be matched.
Yeah, Mr. Trowbridge, he taught me how to play Fortnite, which is why I'm so good now.
Yeah, I hear you're a guru.
Yeah, well, I am now. I mean, it just took one afternoon with Andrew, and I was an expert. So, but the thing is, I just take to things. I take to them really quickly. So, I know some people take years to learn things, but I don't know. I can just pick things up and become good at them almost immediately. It's a talent, I suppose.
It's so supple wrist action you have, Yeti Uncle John.
I'm so glad you've noticed. Yes, I do have very supple wrists. Often people think that Yeti are big, cumbersome things, but I've got a certain. Well, I mean, Mr. Poole, he was known for doing Yeti dancing at one point. He used to do his videos. He used to do his poetry videos, and he always do a little dance. But he can't do it now. I think perhaps he did too many. But Yeti's aren't quite so clod-hopping as you might think, but yes, I'm quite supple. I've managed to keep myself well lubricated over the years, but
and quite rightly too. Your candour does you credit.
Yes. But I feel obviously I like to feel I'm quite humble. I don't like to big myself up. I tend to let other people do that. Stand back and let other people tell everybody how good you are. Yeah.
And big you are too. Big you are too, in many quarters.
Oh, thank you very much. Most kind, most kind. I hear you've been discussing horror films.
Yes, Paul's been getting out some information about Italian slashers.
Oh, yes. Well, I between you and I might have a few copies that I could pass your way. They're not quite as not up to Blu-ray standards, but they're just ones I've had in my locker for about 30 years, so they might be slightly cut. You might prefer the Blu-ray.
Are they in
versions,
Betamax then?
They are in Betamax, yes, but that's collectible now.
I believe it is, yes.
I also have video discs, if you're interested.
Oh, a bit of laser disc.
Oh, that's right, laser disc. Sorry. Yes. So plenty of options. If you find that your local video store has sold out of some of these films, I'm sure I'll be able to supply you with something shiny and horrific. Yeah.
Oh, shiny and horrific. I look forward to a bit of horrific. I'm braced for it.
Oh dear. Well, I suppose I better let you go. You probably got to get back to your sausage show, but
very good sausage. Thank you.
I was listening to several the other day when I was chatting with the magpies in my magpie hut. But there was one about Carry On. I heard you doing.
Oh, we're having a little bit of saucy Carry On, and I was presenting a few sausage rolls.
Oh well, that's always be recommended. Yes. Anyway, I'm hungry now, so I'm going to go and have a roll with a sausage. I think so.
Right.
I'll let you get back.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure, Yeti, Uncle John.
Oh, I know it is. Thank you. Well, I'll speak to you again soon.
Right. Ta-ta now.
Bye.
Oh, I think that was a wonderful episode, don't you, Toppy? I sure do. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, kitty, dealy. Purr, kitty. Oh, I love Dee.
524, 524, 524,
that was a whopper. Boy. 524. This is just the weirdest thing I've ever heard.